In this episode, I am once again joined by Rebekah Sturgill, mother, schoolteacher, and convert to Orthodox Christianity. Rebekah discusses the contemplative methods of Orthodox Christianity, shares one of the tradition's core practices, the Jesus Prayer, and discusses the importance of the liturgical year. Rebekah explores the phenomenology of a felt sense of Christ, explains the ideal of Theosis, and reveals why the imagination is discouraged in Orthodox practice. Rebekah also details the Orthodox view on demons, compares it to popular depictions in books and films, and offers her own experience of the supernatural dimensions of the spiritual war for the human will. So without further ado, Rebekah Sturgill. Rebekah Sturgill, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve.
Well,
Happy to be here.
Oh, good. Yes. Well, I'm so delighted to be talking with you again. And gosh, our last episode caused quite a splash. It was entitled, I think, My Conversion to Orthodox Christianity. Of course, not my conversion, but your conversion to Orthodox Christianity. And in that episode, we covered a great deal of your own life path and the various different systems of belief or political orientations and so on that you become involved with, as well as your evolving educational journey and other things of that nature. And we arrived at the series of events that saw you convert to Orthodox Christianity. And we left it on something of a cliffhanger. And that's around, if you like, the enacting of a religious faith. We dealt quite a bit with belief, with ideas, with meaning, etc., as well as personal subjective experience, relationships, and so on. But the thing we didn't talk about, and something that I think is one of the great appeals of Orthodox Christianity to many converts, is this sense of quality of practice, of a kind of intact, so it's sometimes said, mystical, that is to say, practical religious tradition. So we had agreed to come back, and so I'm so pleased you've agreed to talk a bit about that. So where should we start?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this recently. We're recording this the beginning of August, so we've just had the Feast of the Transfiguration, which is kind of a strange feast. It's commemorating the time Christ goes on a mountain with three of the disciples, and he's transfigured. There's this uncreated light. Moses and Elijah appear, and the disciples have no idea what to do with themselves. And there's this whole feast around it. And it's kind of a strange feast in terms of what, other ones are, celebrating the birth of Christ, or his resurrection or something. But I've been pondering this a lot because it's a mystical experience that the disciples have, and then they have to go and they have to live with it. And so it seems like we talked a lot about last time about these ideas and about having the mystical experience, but then, okay, great, what do you do now? I've had a mystical experience, now what? So, and a lot of that comes out in the practice. So I think something I've been thinking about a lot, and start wherever you think.
Well, I often interview all sorts of different religious practitioners here, but meditation is something of a common theme, and not all Buddhists, but a lot of people are involved in meditation somehow or another. And so meditation is seen generally as a sort of private, personal, individual practice of directing, or maybe radically not directing attention, that sort of thing, sometimes sitting on a cushion, or, whatever, you can go for a walk and so on. But there's something about community and what's it called? The special year that you have? What's it called?
Special year?
There's a word for the rhythms of the year that you have.
The liturgical year?
Yes, that's it. The liturgical year. And the liturgical year. And so there's a relationship to time, and there's a relationship to community that's crucial to Orthodox Christian practice, it seems. And is there also this sort of individual meditative aspect? I'm wondering if you might say something about how these different aspects, this communal aspect of practice, which seems so crucial, this aspect of time, this temporal aspect, and this, to what extent it's their sort of individual meditation practice, how those interact, and how it was you encountered and integrated those practices as a new convert?
Yeah. So the idea of time is interesting, and that talking about the liturgical year, we're at the end of the liturgical year. The first day of the year liturgically is September 1st. So we're at the very end of the church calendar, and we had the Feast of the Transfiguration, like I said, where there's this opening up to the reality of who God is that the disciples have. And then the last major feast of the year is the Dormition of the Mother of God. It's the Assumption in the West, but it's the death of Mary. The first feast of the year is actually her birth, which is quite interesting. It's not centered around the feast of Christ. It's bookended by Mary's feast. So learning these things and learning these rhythms was a huge part of just making all of this tangible. This time of year is particularly special to me because this is when I first came, and it's after Pascha, after Pentecost, after all of these big things, usually kind of the climax of the year. And so you're getting all of these more regular rhythms. Sunday is for the resurrection. You have major feasts, but they're not, things like the birth of Christ. And so getting used to all of these things and then seeing them coming around again is a huge part of both your personal prayer practice and praying with the community. There's different prayers that you do at different times of year. We're in a fasting period right now. There's 2 weeks of fasting leading up to the Dormition of Mary. And during this time, there's a service called the Praeclasis, a supplicatory canon to the Mother of God. It's this beautiful piece of music, of poetry, where we're asking Mary for help. I'm swallowed by my passions. I am completely consumed in darkness. Pray for me, help me. Ask your son. I'm so lost and I need help. And so there's an aspect of that that's so personal, which is very familiar to anyone coming out of American Christianity. Your personal prayer, you're praying to God on your own terms. So there's an aspect there that's similar, but there's also, we often do this prayer. Like I went last night to church and we were singing it all together as a community. And there's so many things. Where do we go? You're constantly reminded in Orthodoxy that your salvation is tied up with everyone else's salvation. Your being saved isn't based off of just, okay, I'm going to do all the right things and then therefore I'm going to be saved. I'm going to say a certain prayer. I'm going to dedicate my life to Christ, whatever it is. There's something about having to be together and having to work together that is salvific for you. There's also something about how your time spent in prayer by yourself also affects all those people. I think we talked last time, maybe we just talked separately, but I think we spoke podcast before about the beginning of the Lenten season. The very first service of Lent is called Forgiveness Vespers. And you have to ask every single person in the church for forgiveness. And they ask you for forgiveness as well. It's your best friend, it's your husband, it's someone you've never met before. Everyone, you have to ask them for forgiveness because there's something so tied up in community life and personal life. Even if I've never directly met this person, my own sins, my own passions can still hurt them. Maybe directly, maybe I'm spreading gossip about them. Maybe I'm spreading gossip about someone else and then all of these things happen. But maybe it's just the fact that I'm creating more chaos in the world through my own actions. So all of these, the personal and the community are constantly playing together. And we're reminded of these things at different times of the year. The cycle of the year, sometimes you have to fast and you don't want to. Sometimes you have to feast and you're actually like, I'd like to go on a diet, whatever it is at the time. But there's an aspect of that your life is not your own, that you are subject to seasons of the year, you're subject to other people, and this is actually, in remembering that your life is not your own and that you're subject to these things, is actually where your true freedom and your true self is found. Because you're getting rid of all of the things that actually aren't you, that we like to identify with, different passions. So yeah, that was a lot, and I think you can direct where we go from there. Yeah, it feels like there's so many things to talk about. Maybe we figure out a better way in.
I think that's very interesting. You began there talking about your adjustment to this idea of community and practice that's linked to the calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, what other encounters did you have with practice? How were you introduced to it? Do they teach you? Is there a certain kind of induction course where they teach you the various practices and how to orient yourself as a new convert? What does one do each day as an Orthodox Christian? Do you get up? Do you pray? Is there a Bible reading? Is there meditation? What does one do? And how did you learn how to do it?
I think a lot of that deals with being in the community and talking with the priest, like someone not coming up with it on your own. So there are, I don't have any next to me, there are prayer books. So I remember talking to my priest and saying, okay, I know I'm supposed to pray. How do you do that? And he gave me just a little prayer book, really simplified little prayers. But it's not like, okay, these are the prayers an Orthodox Christian has to say every single day. Prayer rules have developed over time. A lot of them are based off of the monastic hours, but for people living in the world, you're not going to stop every 2 hours and do a whole reading from the Psalms. So yeah, the general idea is get up and the first thing you do is you pray, and then when you're going to bed, the last thing you do is that you pray. So you're kind of starting and ending your day in this way. Am I very successful at this? Probably not, depending on the time of year and what else is going on. When you become a parent, sometimes things get a bit crazy. So but the general expectation is, praying in the morning, praying in the evening. There's prayer books from different traditions that you can use. There's Bible readings every day that you can use, but a lot of it is not just coming up with something on your own. It's talking with your priest, or your father confessor, someone, a spiritual father who I normally talk to is not currently my parish priest. He's retired. He was my priest coming into the church. So if I need guidance, I call him and talk to him because he knows me so well. But there's a huge aspect of not part of catechism is being told some of these things. How do you pray? Resources, things like that. But a huge part of it is not just coming up with your own thing. Anytime I've been really unsuccessful at a prayer rule, it's because I've been like, oh, I'm going to do the morning prayers I've been given, and I'm going to do this other thing, and I'm going to add this on, and I'm going to, and I get really gung-ho, and it becomes unsustainable. Like when you want to make a large fire and you make it too big too fast, and then it just burns up. So this is, again, going back to your life not being your own. There are different traditions around what you can do in the morning and the evening, and it comes down to following the guidance of someone who knows better than you on what you do specifically. One specific practice that a lot of people encourage is the Jesus prayer, using a prayer rope. I have this tiny one right here. And so it's often compared to the rosary in the West, but the rosary is a very specific thing. They both kind of come from the tradition of meditating on the Psalms, but you have all these little knots. And let's see if I can, there we go. Now I feel like a YouTuber. And you pray, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, for each one. And it's a way, it's different than like a Buddhist meditation where you're, the no thought. It's focusing one's thoughts not on yourself, but on Christ, and using something physical to help you do that. so that you have this physical reminder when I'm sitting there and I'm praying and I suddenly realize I'm making a grocery list instead of praying, or I'm thinking about the things I need to do or something. I have a physical reminder of what I should be doing. So a priest might say, do the morning prayers and do 15 minutes of the Jesus prayer, or they might say just do the Jesus prayer for a certain amount of time. But it's really in conversation with someone who knows you and is praying for you and knows better than you, rather than picking up a tradition, like picking up an idea in a book or something on what one does every day.
When you pray the Jesus prayer, it's sort of recited, the same short phrase is recited again and again and again as you go through this rope. What is the mind doing? Are you merging with the sounds and the rhythms? Are you immersing in this sort of a devotional sense? Are you imagining imagery or narrative points or doctrinal points? What's going on in the mind as you recite that Jesus prayer?
I would say in the East, we definitely don't have a tradition of the imaginative in prayer. In the West, there's like the St. Ignatius exercises, where you're kind of going through and you're imagining yourself in a place and you're kind of immersing yourself. We don't really have that in the East, in part because there's always the temptation that you're imagining it wrong, or you're imagining something else, or that the imagination can be the focus instead of what's actually going on. So usually we might have an icon in front of us, so that's something physically to like set your eyes on. But there's kind of, I'm definitely not an expert at this. So, I mean, there's the disclaimer. I'm someone who's trying to be a Christian and is trying to do all these things, but goodness, I hope no one takes my advice. There's a movement of breathing, often associated with the Jesus prayer, of rising and falling. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then the cycle of breath going through and purifying your whole body as you're saying these words. And so getting into this rhythm and focusing on the words of it. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So the focus is on Christ, but it's coming back to oneself. It's purifying you of the sins that you have, that you will continue to have because we're human beings, but constantly keeping the focus on Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as the one who's purifying. So yeah, and people who practice it quite a lot would probably say a lot more than that. But I would definitely say, no imaginative aspect, or trying to avoid that, because there's so many temptations associated with that. So there is kind of an aspect of clearing one's mind that is similar to like in like a Buddhist meditation. You're not trying to ponder all these different things or create an image, but there is still something to be focused on, and it's Christ.
So sometimes then your attention is presumably directed at the visual experience of the image of the icon, and also presumably a part of it is assigned to the experience of reciting the phrase prayer. And now you're also saying focusing on Christ, but not imaginatively. Christ is presumably not physically there, of course. So is it a conceptual idea of Christ? What when you say focusing on Christ, I'm curious, phenomenologically speaking, what that entails for you when you do it. I mean, I understand you can't make necessarily authoritative statement about the Jesus prayer in all of Orthodoxy, but we could just work with your understanding.
Yeah, I think it's something that I struggle with because there isn't the physical aspect. We believe that Christ was fully man and fully God, so he is he is fully God, and yet he also has a body. So there is a physical aspect to Christ, but it's not something that I'm personally experiencing. I'm not pretending that he's hugging me, something like this, that I might have had encouraged whenever I was evangelical. And so I think it is something that I struggle with. What is it? What does that mean? So there's an element of, sometimes it's focusing on that purification of my own heart. Psalm 50 is included in almost every set of Orthodox prayers, and that includes the line, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me." Taking out the sinful heart and putting in an entirely new one. So sometimes that's the focus. There's something I often will find. I will often find myself, if I have an icon in front of me, looking into like the eyes of Christ, and really, I don't know, it's, there's no meditation on that, but it's some sort of hearkening to the physical experience, the physical reality. I mean, when we talk about icons in churches, we're saying the reason that icons are in churches are because they're not pictures, they're not decoration. They're representing those who are there with us in the liturgy. When I look up during liturgy and I see icons of St. Nicholas, it's because he's part of the liturgy in a mystical way. He's there, but I don't really see him as a person. But there is still a presence there, and the icon is there to show me that is happening. So, so I think what do I focus on? I think because I struggle with the being too conceptual, I try to focus on what is the physical reality that I may or may not be experiencing, but it's something that I struggle with quite a lot.
When you say physical reality, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking about a felt sense, as in a somatic experience. For example, a tingling, or a sense of an emotional sense, or maybe an emotional response to a sense of presence, for example.
Yeah, because I think that's like what we talk about with like a mystical experience. It's not that you're seeing, just because you're not seeing something exactly there, it doesn't mean that you're not having some sort of other type of vision of it being there. I think, not trying to conjure up something, like trying to conjure up a feeling of that. I have to think about this. Honestly, sometimes it feels like if we're talking about the physical reality, the most obvious place to go, because so much of prayer is in preparation for receiving the Eucharist, communion, the body and blood of Christ. It's bread and it's wine. It's also the body and blood of Christ, and partaking in that. And they in the different epistles in the New Testament, Paul talks about people who are taking this sacrament unworthily or without preparation, and it's to their destruction that this is happening. Like, this is not good for them. And there's other times where I've heard people talking about that, the way that you approach it, there's a sense of actually forgetting of the reality that this is the body and blood of Christ. So this is so difficult.
Well, it's interesting. When I probe you phenomenologically like this, and I say, what are you doing with your attention? What sensations are you focusing on? For example, is it a physical feeling? Is it a visual image that you're looking at, an icon? Is it a mental image? or is it the sound, or is it a sort of a concept, like purification and so on, or whatever, this sort of thing. I don't mean to reduce the prayer. I don't mean to imply that the prayer experience of prayer is mere phenomenology, that it is simply the direction of attention or the sensations that you're focusing on. I'm not suggesting that the prayer is merely that. I'm, in a way, just technically speaking, as a sort of meditation, someone with a bit of background in meditation, probing the mechanics of the technique. So I don't mean to deconstruct it into the phenomenological to say, well, you're simply conjuring a sense, or you're looking at this and it creates that effect. I don't mean to break it down quite like that, but I'm interested in the procedure. It seems difficult to describe what you're doing, clearly.
It seems difficult to describe in part because I'm just not, I'm still such a novice at practicing it.
Fair enough.
It feels a bit like asking someone, oh, you went to a meditation camp for a week and now you've started doing it. So, but I think it's also something about when I think about friends of mine who, when they start meditation, how they describe it. And then when I talk to friends who have been doing it for quite a long time, there's something that changes about the actual practice of doing it. And I still feel like such a novice, like I can describe the way that I'm breathing and I'm looking at this icon and I'm focusing on the person of Christ, but, trying to focus on maybe more of a concept. We're really trying to look at the icon so that I'm not imagining, or like there's so much temptation in fantasy. We use that in such a particular way, but there's just this general idea of creation of something that may or may not be real.
I'm curious about that. What's the concern about imagination and this creative capacity?
Because it's not like that we're against creation or against imagination generally, but I think it's easy to lie to oneself. It's easy, and there's stories in the Desert Fathers where people, these monks will go out and they want to pray and they want to focus, and then they've been doing this for a while and they are not cautious of how they're doing this, and they're not in touch with other people, and then they have this angel appear to them to say, you are going to be the next prophet, you are going to be this amazing person, this great elder, yada yada yada. It's not an angel, it's a demon. And they actually could have figured that out if they had been less focused on that kind of ecstasy. They would have been able to see, oh, this isn't actually an angel of light, this is something coming to tempt me, to trick me. But because they were so wrapped up in the fantasy, they couldn't see the reality of it. But I mean, we have, there's so much beautiful hymnography of the church and art of the church. It's not like there's no creative aspect. And you have to have, in order to make a lot of the connections, sometimes whenever I'm at services and I see the connections being made between different stories in the Bible and the saints' lives and the symbolism going through all these different layers, that takes a specific vision and a creative vision, but it's not, it's about using this creative vision to probe, to truly see reality rather than total fantasy. So I think, there's a hesitation, but it's not like a prohibition. It's not like the Orthodox hate imagination. But there's always a caution of where is this coming from? Is it coming from yourself? Is it coming from your passions? Are you creating some sort of fantasy that might logically make sense, but kind of gives you a pass? Like, oh, I think in this case, God would say this to me, whatever it is. So yeah, there's a caution. Like, this is a beautiful tool. I mean, when we create, we're God created us in his image and likeness. And part of that image and likeness is being creative, being a creator like God. But using that in the right way and using that in the way that's appropriate, which is tricky.
When I think of various meditation traditions that I've read about, including Christian ones, actually,
Mm-hmm.
there are, of course, many warnings about different techniques. And some of those warnings are warnings that say, don't approach this technique at all, because the possible pitfalls of it are not worth engaging with it at all, even if it maybe has some possible benefits. Other warnings say, well, it's okay, you can do the technique, but just watch out. There are some pitfalls along the way you might fall into. I can think of one example. Something you said there reminded me of this. This idea of spiritual experiences or special experiences, state experiences, visions or states of ecstasy or so. I think most traditions warn about these somehow or another. Some traditions will say, yet today's enlightenment is tomorrow's mistake. Don't get hung up or caught in a special experience you have. It may be wonderful and special and all that, but if you cling on to it, in a sense, it's like trying to hold on to yesterday's bread, and eventually it's going to go off and it no longer nourish you. In fact, it might even become a toxin, spiritual toxin in a sense, that experience you had. Or sometimes people will say, don't engage in those concentration practices that bring you into a deep, profound sense of sort of union and bliss, because you can become addicted to that bliss, and you become kind of lost in the sea of ecstatic experience, and you'll never gain insight or breakthrough or achieve whatever it is that the system says. Or even St. John of the Cross, who says when you ascend Mount Carmel, be careful not to be frightened away by the monsters and beasts you encounter, but nor stop to pick the flowers. In other words, don't be, you're going to have some positive and negative experiences. Take that in your stride. Approach it with, to use a Buddhist word, equanimity.
Yeah, I mean, what is the point of all this? If the point of meditation becomes this ecstatic experience or bliss, then you've lost the plot. If the kind of the center of your spiritual practice is this mystical experience you've had, that experience should have been pointing you onto something else, yet it becomes an end. And so that, yeah, I mean, all of those things that you were saying, it seems like the means become the end. We forget what we're actually doing any of these things for. I mean, this is a huge part of why community is important. And going to confession is a huge part of Orthodoxy, so that when you have thoughts, whether they're, terrible thoughts and you're down on yourself and you're thinking horrible things about people or whatever, or if you're just thinking, man, I'm getting so good at prayer. I'm really good at this. And this is easy. You're talking about it with someone. And so the reality of what's really going on is setting in. Are you, do you have, prelest is I think it's a Russian word for the state of kind of spiritual lying to oneself, thinking like, oh, I'm so wise, I am so prayerful, I've really got this down. There's a whole word to describe this state of confusion that you're in when you're there. And it can be just as harmful as, hating yourself and being down on yourself and thinking all these terrible things. So you have to have this outside people, going to confession, talking to a spiritual father. You have to go to church on Sundays. You can't just sit at your house and be so prayerful by yourself, to help with all of these balances, so you don't just fall into the pitfalls, and you can navigate both the flowers and the monsters.
You raised a very interesting question there, which you anticipated one of my questions, which is, what's the point? That's how you put it. I perhaps wouldn't have put it quite so directly, but what is the point of Orthodox practice? Are there such things as stages? In many religions, there are sort of stages that one goes to. I think of Sufism, for example, has various different stages that you go through in their contemplative practices. Of course, Buddhism has that. Are there stages then? Is there an aim? I hear this word theosis comes up quite a lot in respect to Orthodox Christianity as some sort of special thing. So what's the point of these practices? And are there stages or a sense of progression, and towards what?
I mean, I think there is a sense of progression, but it's not linear, like, oh, done that stage, on to the next one. We, different seasons of life call for different things. Whenever you, working on your spiritual life and doing all these things, and then suddenly I think about like my husband, who had this very solitary life where he was very prayerful and going to monasteries and doing these things, and then suddenly he gets married and has a kid. It's not that there's a regression, but there is a different thing that's happening. Certain things have to become a focus now. So yeah, what is the point? Theosis is often described as the point. Theosis is becoming, you get into so many pitfalls with this, becoming God, and not becoming God like I become my own God and I'm separate, but it's, so when you have, let's think about how to do this. When you have the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, these are three in one, three persons in one. So, and we often use the word union without confusion. So these things are all united as one thing, and yet the Father is separate from the Son, is separate from the Holy Spirit. And there's something about that we have been created in the image and likeness of God, and that our goal is to return to God, and not like in that we get thrown into this blob of we're all just thrown in and we're all mixed together and we're all just, theosis soup. There's a sense of fully retaining who you are and becoming more of who you truly are without all your passions, without all of these other things, as you come closer to God. There's St. Isaac the Syrian has a description of heaven and hell being the same place. It's just the all-consuming light of God's love. And we're either warmed by this light or we're burned by it, depending on how we have approached God. Are we able to receive this love? Are we not able to? But yeah, the point is to be one with God. We were talking earlier about in saving oneself. What does that mean? It also means saving everyone else around you, the salvation of the whole world. So it's not just some sort of, theosis is a personal thing, but it's not, the focus isn't just you. Like, I am focusing on my theosis. I'm going out into the wilderness. I'm not gonna, take care of my kid anymore. I'm just gonna focus on my own salvation. In working towards your salvation, you're working towards other people's salvation, and working towards other people's salvation, you're working towards yours. I was thinking of getting in trouble. I was thinking about getting into universalist vocabulary and things like that. But the hope is that all people every person is saved and all people achieve this. So that's the point. So if I'm focusing on a mystical experience that I had and thinking about how special I am, then I'm not getting closer to God. I'm getting closer to me, or maybe my pride, and I'm not helping anyone else around me. So I've lost that plot. In thinking through what the point is.
I wonder, it's a very interesting metaphor you referred to there, this idea of the heat of God, and one that's either warmed by it in a good way or burned by it. Have you experienced that metaphor in your own devotional life? The heat of God?
Yeah, I mean, I think about times like when I've really repented, when I've really been face to face with who I am and what things I've done, or what's going on in my own heart. And when people talk about shame, they'll sometimes talk about, there's a heat on your face, like you're red because of shame. And there's an element to feeling that heat in a negative way whenever you see how far you've fallen. And then going to confession and fully acknowledging this and laying it all out, and then being able to have that same heat kind of turn into, I don't know, I think you're heating up boiling water. Boiling water is going to feel terrible if you touch it, but if you wait just a little while, then you have a cup of tea. And so there's this transformation of that heat into something that, okay, now I am warmed. I've been purified. It's been, the chaff has been burned off, and I'm left with this warmth. So I think, yeah, I am I always cognizant of that? No, but there have definitely been times when I feel like I've experienced that, and particularly around times of like real repentance and real acknowledging of where I am.
In many religious traditions, there is an element of ethical conduct and an expectation of behavioural change as one progresses in one's faith. Is there such an expectation, an ethical expectation in your experience of Orthodox Christianity? And if so, what is it? And what's the means to effect, if it is there, positive behavioural change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we talked about biographically last time. There's a certain amount of obedience, which obedience is a word that's difficult for people, especially, us moderns to deal with, but discipline is a word that we're very comfortable with, and how I'm thinking about it is very similar. I cannot just do what I want to do, possibly in part because it's harmful to other people. I think the best kind of example of breaking down of like an ethical expectation in Christianity would be in the Gospel according to Matthew, where Christ, the famous parable of the sheep and the goats, and to all these, every single person there is, saying that they're professing Christ, they're following, they believe in God, all these things, but the sheep are the ones that fed the poor, and they visited those in prison, and they clothed people, and they took care of the sick. And the goats, the people who were over there, had those opportunities and didn't take them. So there's a real sense of, in the practice of living out Christianity, it's not just about saying, I believe in the Nicene Creed. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, this whole thing. You do have to have that. But if you have that, then what does that actually mean? If I look at another human being and I know that this person was created in the image and likeness of God, how can I let him go hungry? How can I let him suffer alone? So there's, I don't know if there's necessarily a progression of ethical, like once you've reached a certain point, there's more restrictions or something. Sometimes there's an easing into some of the practices of the church, like fasting. I've known people who have really struggled with fasting, so they've talked to their priest, and maybe for the first couple fasting periods of coming into the church, they're just vegetarian instead of fully vegan. Things like this. There's some element of increasing stringency as you go on, but not because you've like reached different levels, but just because we're doing what we're doing what we're capable of. Changing your entire life in one go is quite difficult. So yeah, I would say the ethical aspect, that moral life is, completely central. It cannot just be a rational, mystical, intellectual experience. It has to be a lived thing. This is so the Philokalia is well known among lots of different people. It's a collection of spiritual writing, and sometimes it gets talked about as if it's like an Orthodox Bible. But the Philokalia is all about the prayer of the heart, which is what we started talking about with the Jesus prayer. But St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, who put this book together, he also put together books about ethical life. What does it actually mean to be a Christian in the world? And I think sometimes, especially as Westerners, when we're looking east, we get really caught up in kind of this prayer of the heart meditation, That's interesting and that's different. But just as important is the ethical life.
So what is the ethical ideal? It's not presumably merely the Ten Commandments, perhaps the Beatitudes, or so. What is the, if you want, ideal that Orthodox Christian attempts to emulate or become?
Um,
How do you know what's good and what's
how do you
bad?
know? How do I know what's good and what's bad? I think I mentioned this before, but I think a huge part of it is remembering that every single human being is Christ. When someone is in need in front of me, that person is Christ. And sometimes it's not clear what the right thing to do is. I work at a bookstore and we're downtown, and we sometimes have people coming in off the streets. And sometimes it seems like the right thing to do would be to let them sit for a really long time, give them a cup of coffee, give them some water. And sometimes it seems like they might be a danger to some of the other people in the store. So I can't let them just sit for a while because it might be harmful to other people. So what is the right thing to do? I mean, I feel like I'm constantly asking myself, what is the right thing to do? If every person that I'm interacting with is Christ, what do I do? And it's hard. I don't feel like I feel like anyone who says that it's like totally clear cut of always knowing what the right thing to do is probably crazy. Or, I mean, maybe they just have certain definitions that I don't have. But I think, yeah, remembering that when you're serving others, you're serving Christ. That's kind of central to this. So how can I serve this other person and not serve myself? Do I want, like, if I want this person to leave the bookstore right now, is it because he's a danger to someone else, or is it because I just don't really want him there? If it's the second one, then maybe I need to kind of reevaluate what I'm doing and how I feel. If it's the one where he might be hurting someone else, then maybe that's the path to follow. So yeah, every person around you is Christ. So now what do you do?
That's an interesting frame. One of the things we talking about, I feel excuse that clumsy phrase. One of the things we'd thought to discuss was this idea of saints, angels, demons, principalities, etc. A kind of supernatural dimension of entities and so on and beings. And that was something I think very early on when we had first discussed having interviews at all was something you proposed. I'm curious about that, both about your understanding of that subject in terms of Orthodox Christianity, but also in your own, I suppose, biographical encounter as a new convert. When did they start telling you about the demons and stuff? At what point did they start telling you about that?
I mean, right off the bat, this is just part of, because it's not like it's okay, you've earned this, you've gotten to a point, now we can talk about what's going on there. It's that this is part of reality. I'm reading a Graham Greene novel right now, The End of the Affair, and in it the narrator says something about, like, people have such an easy time believing in a personal God. Why can't they just, seems just as easy to believe in a personal devil. So this is actually what's going on. This isn't like some sort of, the Orthodox don't separate natural and supernatural. This is all just reality. Like when I said earlier about the icons showing a reality that I can't necessarily see with my eyes, but like there's an icon of St. John Maximovich that looks directly at me when I'm standing in the choir at church. And he's there. Like actually he's there. It's not just that there's a painting of him. He's there at the liturgy. Whether or not I'm fully cognizant of it. And the angels are there and the demons are there. There's so many stories in the lives of the saints of them, like there's some sort of problem that they're having, and then they're kind of given this momentary vision and they see these demons like messing with the stuff in their house and doing something, like, oh, that's what's going on. It's that this is at play. So yeah, I mean, it's just all right there. It's not saved for later. because it's, we're not gonna wait to tell you about reality until after you've signed enough forms. But this is hard for Westerners. I mean, right now there's a very popular podcast that's Orthodox called The Lord of Spirits. It's two Orthodox priests talking about the Nephilim and angels and all sorts of different things like that. And I mean, I know tons of people who listen to it who aren't Orthodox, because it's just fascinating. But it's to Westerners, but it's just part of the reality of the world. So yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, this came up because I said something about how I feel like I have more in common cosmologically with like witches than I do with Baptists. And I said that recently to a friend of mine who's a deacon, and he said, yeah, I mean, that's probably true, because there's an acknowledgement. I mean, there's obvious differences, perhaps differences in hierarchy and differences in ultimate reality, or who's really in charge, or things like this. But like the fact that there are demons and angels at play in everything that I'm doing all day long is true, and it's something that has to be taken into consideration. So
this idea of angels and demons is, of course, popular in fiction, and many TV series and books and movies and so on have these sorts of themes, including possession and temptation and spiritual. Of course, there's also famous books like the Screwtape Letters and sorts of things. I wonder if you might. So I think this idea is already in the consciousness in a sense, of course. So I wonder if you might, if you're able, give a sketch of your understanding of the Orthodox Christian view of this, and perhaps also how it differs from some of those more popular representations.
Yeah, and anytime I find myself, realizing that I'm facing a temptation or something like that, I often think about Wormwood writing to Screwtape, thinking, oh, there was a conversation about this. It's not really what the Orthodox cosmology is, but it's just a fun little idea. But yeah, I think there's an idea. So the ultimate reality is that God created the universe from nothing. And by from nothing, I mean that he didn't snap his finger. I don't mean that he like snapped his fingers and it existed. I mean that he created from himself. So the ultimate reality is goodness. God is love. That's the ultimate reality. But there are things that have come about in contrast to that. And so you have angels as being creations of God, working for goodness and being his messengers. I mean, angelos, it's a messenger. And then you have these demons working against goodness. But it's not like I think we often think about good versus evil, but it's really goodness or against goodness. The ultimate truth isn't evil isn't a thing. Evil exists only in contrast to the good. I think the most important thing is that goodness is the ultimate reality, and what we call evil is simply working against goodness rather than being a thing in and of itself. Demons aren't tempting you towards, not necessarily tempting you towards something, but they're tempting you away from God. Yeah, but maybe. So, can you say your question again?
Sure. I was asking you for a sense of how Orthodox Christianity views this realm, and I was contrasting it with popular representations. Basically, the gist of the popular representations are usually something along the lines of Lucifer, the devil rebelled against God and was cast down with a third of the angels. And now they kind of roam around, or are in hell and break through, or depending on the movie, right?
Yeah.
And they have some sort of powers. And some Christian sects believe that they're territorially assigned to certain places. Some sects believe that local chthonic spirits and so on are fallen angels and so on, and they go about binding them. I've seen Christians walking perimeters of landmarks, national borders, claiming hills, and doing rituals of exorcism and binding and casting out and so on. So there's this sense of spiritual geography, which is seen also in many Himalayan religions, for example, this idea of sort of claiming a hill for Buddha and converting the sacred spirit that abides there, etc., or driving you out. Sometimes in the movies, it's presented as a war for the soul. People are trying to get to heaven, and the devil's trying to always trip them up through various means. I was asking you for a thumbnail sketch of the doctrinal view, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that it's a useful framework for you to relate to your own ethical struggles, so that you feel a certain temptation to do something, and you have a sense that maybe there's some demonic force there it's a way of sort of externalizing that and working with it. But also that these are real demons and angels and things. Somehow they're engaged in some war or so, or some contest for your will or so.
We talk a lot about unseen warfare in Orthodoxy, so that there's this warfare going on, for your soul. It's not like, so and the devil can put it in a bottle and keep it there, or put you in a lake of fire forever. But it's more like if the goal is to be united with God and to be perfectly who you are in the light of God, anything that can keep you from focusing on that, anything that can keep you from being familiar with that. I mean, this is the whole being warmed by the fire, being harmed by the fire. If you're unfamiliar with this, then you might be really put off by it. And so keeping your attention away. So yeah, I mean, it's a useful framework to think about, of like, oh, this is from a demon, but it also might be just true. The East talks a lot about logismy. So I mean, like logos, words, but it's the thoughts that we have that aren't really our thoughts. Like when you're sitting and you just suddenly have this, I mean, this can be related to things like OCD, with intrusive thoughts, but also it can just be something as simple as you're focusing on something and suddenly it's like, oh, I'm kind of hungry. I want a sandwich. This is actually in the Screwtape Letters, where he's about to have this like epiphany, and then demon says, I think you're a bit hungry, aren't you? So these thoughts that are not our own, that don't come from us, they come from somewhere. So we talk about them being coming from demons. Because I think a lot of people struggle, like especially when they first start going to confession, and they're like, man, I have all these just horrific thoughts throughout the day. Well, I mean, don't act on them and don't entertain them, but it also may not be you. That may not be from you. That's probably from somewhere else. So yeah, I mean, yeah, useful image, but also like really true. I mean, it's hard to, I don't know exactly what the line between those things are. I think that's going to be a little above my pay grade, but yeah, there are real forces out there fighting for your attention, and fighting. So that might be like fighting for your soul, but fighting for your attention and where you place it.
What's the explanatory story there? Is it that you're not sure, or that you don't want to get it wrong?
Oh, about like Lucifer and falling and everything like that.
Right.
You mean that explanatory story? Yeah, I am not certain. I'm not certain enough. I might recommend people look to something like the Lord of Spirits, where you have some priests talking about it. I'm sure they have some episodes on that. I'm not exactly sure, because I'm in the West. I've read Paradise Lost, so all these images are there. So there's also just certain things that, I mean, I've only been in the church for 7 years, which is like the longest I've done most things, longer than I've done most things in my life, but it's still such a short amount of time. And so there's certain questions that it's not that the questions don't matter, it's that they're not the primary thing right now for me. So like understanding that there are demons at work is important for me in, you know, thinking through intrusive thoughts, thinking through my own passions, stuff like that. But it hasn't come up that knowing exactly the origin story of, you know, demons and Lucifer and all these things hasn't really come up that that's been the most important thing for me to discover at a certain point. It probably will at some point. There's lots of things I feel like I'm continually learning new depths as I keep living. I almost said progress, but it doesn't feel like progression. We're going back to the liturgical year. You're on this cycle and you're coming back around, and there's more and more things that every time you catch. There's so many things I noticed this last year of interplay between the liturgy, the services for Christmas and for Easter, Nativity and Pascha. All of these parallels of what it means for Christ to be made man and for him to die. And like some of the hymns are exactly the same, and I had never noticed it. So you're catching all these things on different go around. So, you know, is it a progression? Is it an eternal return? I don't know. But there are things that are unfolded as you are steeped in it. I mean, it's like learning a language. There's certain things that you're going to notice first, and then you go back and you read the same very simple sentences weeks later, and you pick up new things because other parts of it have already been clear. When it's all new, then you can't learn all of it. So yes. So I would say maybe look to the Lord of Spirits podcast for something on that, and not me.
I'm surprised that in 7 years, your priests and community have introduced you to the idea that there are demons out there, and the thoughts you might be thinking might be put there by these demons, but they haven't seen it reasonable to really explain anything about it beyond that. That seems a little heuristically negligent, because you could sort of think of anything then, couldn't you? You could sort of see a Netflix show and take that to be your, so to speak, head canon.
This is a huge thing that we're running into with catechism generally. I think that all churches are running into with catechism generally, is so many people are coming in with false ideas of certain things and trying to figure out what those things are and how to fix it. So no, I mean, it is something that has come up. Certainly, it's one of those things that I don't want to get wrong. But it's not something that like doesn't come up. And especially it's definitely not something that if I came to a priest and I said, what's the deal with this? It's not like he would go, oh no, we don't need to. He would sit down and talk about it. There's also an element of, I think, with catechism, especially with people who are coming into the church via the internet, there is a tendency to focus so much on things like that, so much so that you're not actually like living the ethical life. Like you're so focused on like, and it's not even really the theology. It's really like collecting the lore that I see this because I work at a bookstore that sells Orthodox books. So I see this all the time where people come in and they talk about, oh, I'm Orthodox, and they start explaining things like this, but they've actually never been to a church before. They've just kind of thought themselves into it. So I think there's been a real focus in the last couple of years in catechism on the practical and making sure people are really living a Christian life, because then all of the other stuff falls into place and makes sense in a way that, like, if you really start with, okay, well, let's talk about where demons come from, it's easy to get trapped into thinking that that's the point. And it's not like it's a hidden teaching, and it's not like it doesn't come up. You know, I'm currently, I have a 3-year-old. A lot of my spirituality right now is in the practice of what does it mean to be patient with a 3-year-old? How do I actually imitate a Christian life for him? How do I do all these things? That's just where I personally am right now. And so there will come a time when some of these other questions are the most important thing. I have a very practical priest who is like, do you want to spend your time thinking about demons, or do you want to spend your time but then there's other priests who are spending a lot of time talking about this. I mean, I think about some of the work from the Deaths of the World zine, which was run by Justin Marler and now is Father John Valdez in California. And they talk a lot about unseen warfare and where all of these things and what's going on with all of this stuff and where it's coming from. So yeah, I think it depends on the priest and who's in front of the person.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's very fascinating to get an idea of your lived experience of 7 years as an Orthodox convert, and how some of these beliefs and practices figure in. It's very interesting to get that, and also a sense of the ethos, if you like, in educating converts. It's very interesting indeed. So thank you for giving that glimpse. Is there anything else that we ought to say before we bring this to an end? Anything you'd like to say?
I mean, something I kind of touched on in my last response was Orthodoxy is in vogue right now. It's you mentioned that the last podcast got quite a lot of. I started reading some of the comments and then I thought I don't actually need to read any of these. It's very popular, and so it's very popular for people to be super into it. It's also very popular for people to really hate it. But what it is actually a lived practice, and it can't be done online. You can't be Orthodox on the internet. You have to actually be in church. And this applies to everything. I have a friend who's converting to Roman Catholicism right now, and he had kind of a mystical conversion and a very intellectual one. And I said, that's great. And now you have to go to a parish, and you have to go every Sunday, and you have to talk to people. And he said, I know, and I really don't want to. But I know you don't want to. That's the hard part. And so all of these things have to be lived out, and they have to be lived out under guidance from a priest. They have to be lived out under guidance from all of the grandmas at the church who have been doing this for decades. It's a lived thing, and I'm happy to talk about it, happy to share my experience. But I would definitely say for people listening, yeah, Orthodoxy cannot be on the internet. You're not, I mean, you can't be Buddhist on the internet. You can't be anything. Like, this isn't, it has to be the practical, the lived, embodied experience. And that's where this actually is.
Rebekah Sturgill, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.